The honourable member for Thunder Bay, Superior North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a while back I asked the Finance Minister a question about the budget. Mr. Speaker, this Conservative government has staked its reputation on claims of creating jobs, fostering economic growth, and keeping taxes low. Indeed, since 2009, they've spent $113 million in our taxpayer money bragging to Canadians about their so-called economic action plan. But unfortunately for all of us, Mr. Speaker, they have failed miserably on all counts. The government has managed to create a long-term structural deficit, a multi-billion-dollar hole that they're trying to dig themselves out of with cuts and tax shifting that are holding back growth and will continue to hold back growth. Despite their claims that they have not raised taxes, we know that this government has shifted taxes from large corporations onto the backs of the Canadian middle class in each of all of the last 4 budgets. And for the first time in Canadian history, more than half of federal revenue, Mr. Speaker, will come from personal income taxes, the hard-earned dollars of our middle-class families. Meanwhile, personal debt for the average Canadian, as well as for our national debt, have both increased by over 25% under this government. Since 2011, this government has collected an additional $3.6 billion in increased employment insurance premiums, while placing even more restrictions on EI claimants. They've now instituted a freeze, but they refuse to roll back these job-killing payroll tax hikes to pre-2011 levels. This isn't an insurance plan, Mr. Speaker. It's a huge tax grab on small businesses and Canadian workers. The Conservatives have been increasing the financial burden on Canadian families in other ways. Canada has one of the lowest large corporate tax rates in the world. Our rate is less than half of that in the United States, Mr. Speaker, on large corporations. The OECD has warned, Mr. Speaker, that a tax rate on large corporations substantially below the top personal income tax rate, like we see in Canada today, can, quote, jeopardize the integrity of the tax system, as high-income individuals will attempt and are attempting to shelter their savings within corporations, end quote. Unnecessary tax breaks for hugely profitable large corporations, plus an incredible $1.3 billion tax subsidy provided by this government to oil and gas companies, despite the fact that the Conservatives have broken their promise to end this subsidy again and again. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives have also refused to crack down on tax evasion. Estimates suggested upwards of $5 billion is lost every year to offshore tax havens. What's more, Mr. Speaker, their claims about Canadian economic growth are pure fiction. Let's look at the facts. Unemployment has increased by 9%. Youth employment doubled the national rate. Canada's 20th in the OECD for job creation. Real economic growth per capita is the lowest in, wait for it, Mr. Speaker, 78 years. The number of consecutive conservative deficits, 6. Housing costs increased by 52%. Personal debt for the average Canadian and our national debt have increased more than 25%. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives have presided over a dismal lost decade in our Canadian economy. Their failed trickle-down economic approach does little to help the average Canadian have a bright future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know where my honourable colleague has been living the last number of years, but I recommend he come back to Canada, back to this country, where things are actually pretty darn good. And Mr. Speaker, let me reassure the honourable member that neither the middle class nor small businesses are paying higher taxes under this government. In fact, the opposite, the exact opposite is true. Our Conservative government recognizes the vital role that small businesses play in the economy and job creation, and that's why we're committed to helping them grow and succeed. Indeed, one way our government has supported small business is through lower taxes. The member opposite may be interested to know that since 2006, our government has reduced the small business tax rate to 11%, while at the same time increasing the small business limit to $500,000. We've eliminated the corporate surtax for all corporations, which was particularly beneficial to small business corporations as it represented a larger proportion of their overall tax bill. We've also increased the lifetime capital gains exemption to $800,000 and indexed it going forward, which will increase the rewards for investing in small business by making it easier for owners to transfer their family businesses to the next generation of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, as you can plainly see, to suggest that small businesses are paying more in tax under our government is simply fiction. In fact, because of our government's low tax plan, the typical small business now saves over $28,000 on their tax bill. But that's not all. That's not all we're doing to help small businesses thrive across the country. We're also providing them with certainty and flexibility in the years ahead by freezing EI premium rates, a decision that will leave $660 million in the pockets of job creators and workers this year alone. We're also continuing to reduce the red tape burden by eliminating over 800,000 payroll deduction remittances to CRA made every year by over 50,000 small businesses. By doing this, business owners can spend more time running their business and less time filling out paperwork. Our government is also standing up for Canadians and their families by leaving more money in their more of their hard-earned money where it belongs, in their pockets. The member opposite might be interested to know that since 2006, our government has cut over 160 different taxes. For example, we've reduced the GST from 7 to 6 to 5%. We've cut the lowest personal income tax rate to 15%. We've increased the amount Canadians can earn without paying taxes. And we've introduced the tax-free savings account, the most popular savings account in Canadian history. Over 9 million accounts currently exist. Mr. Speaker, because of our government's low tax plan, the federal tax burden is at its lowest level in 50 years, helping an average family of 4 save over $3,400 a year in 2014. That, Mr. Speaker, is real action for Canadian families. Thank you.
The honourable member for Thunder Bay, Superior North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to reiterate, Budget 2014 is a failure for the average Canadian. There are no medals here, no silver, no gold. There's no renewal of the popular eco-energy home retrofit program, which can reduce home energy bills. There's no new funding for desperately needed housing. There's virtually nothing for veterans. There's no pension reform. There's no rollback of the government's past years of job-killing payroll tax hikes. There's no investment in health care, including pharmacare, home care, or community health care, while back in my riding, our regional health science center, health center, has people stacked up to the rafters without beds. There's no investment in rail, including infrastructure, passenger rail, or rail safety. And Canada, Mr. Speaker, remains the only country in the G20 without any national rail strategy. There's no mention of climate change at all in the budget. Mr. Speaker, this budget is a failure, and large corporations remain grossly undertaxed, while small businesses and families are overtaxed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I find it ironic that the member opposite would ask us to bring back the Eco-Energy Retrofit Program, a program that was our program, it was a temporary program, that he voted against. And now he's asking for us to bring it back. It's quite ironic. Mr. Speaker, despite the significant action our government has taken to keep taxes low for Canadians and their families, we're not finished yet. Unlike other members of this House, our government will not engage in dangerous new spending. Despite the continued global economic uncertainty, our government will balance the budget in 2015. A balanced budget is important because it means less taxpayer money is needed to pay interest on debt, makes Canada an attractive place to invest, and it helps keep taxes low. Indeed, this is exactly what we intend to do, Mr. Speaker. Once the budget is balanced, our government is committed to greater tax relief for Canadian families. Thank you.